When love leaves behind a legacy, it doesn't fade, it finds new ways to shine. Amy Fleming never imagined that one decision could test her heart this deeply. With Ty's memory guiding her and Hudson facing its hardest time yet, Amy stands at a crossroads, one that could change not only her family's future but the entire town's. The morning sun stretched across the Heartland ranch, painting gold over the barn roofs and the open fields. Amy stood beside Spartan, her hand resting on his mane, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. The world around her looked peaceful, but inside, her heart was tangled in quiet worry. The letter she had received yesterday still sat folded in her pocket, a donation, large enough to transform Heartland's therapy program. For any other person, it would have been a blessing without question, but Amy had learned that blessings sometimes come with choices that weigh heavier than loss. She looked toward the hills, where the wind moved through the grass like waves. Heartland was growing more horses, more clients, more responsibilities, but in the nearby town of Hudson, things weren't the same. The animal shelter where Ty used to volunteer was closing down, not because people stopped caring, but because funds had dried up. Amy had passed the building on her last trip into town, boarded windows, an empty sign swinging in the cold air. She could still hear the echo of children laughing there, helping the volunteers feed the rescued dogs and cats. Ty had loved that place. He used to call it Hudson's Little Hope. The letter in her pocket now felt heavier than before. Amy unfolded it, her eyes tracing the words once more, a grant in appreciation for Heartland's dedication to healing, for upgrades and expansion. It should have been a moment of pride, but instead, Amy felt a pull inside her chest, a question she couldn't silence. What if the healing Heartland stood for wasn't only meant for horses and riders? What if it was meant for all of Hudson, for every living thing that needed a second chance? A cold breeze carried the scent of hay and earth as Amy walked toward the porch. Jack was already there, sipping coffee, his eyes calm but knowing. He had seen that look on her face before, the one that meant she was wrestling with her heart. "You've got that storm brewing look again," Jack said softly, setting his mug down. Amy smiled faintly. "It's nothing, just thinking about Ty," he asked. She hesitated, then nodded. "Always, but this time, it's about what he would have done." The sound of a distant neigh filled the air as Spartan pawed the dirt impatiently. Amy glanced back at him and thought of Ty's hands guiding hers years ago, showing her how to calm a horse that couldn't trust. "They don't need words," he had said. "They just need to feel your heart steady." Maybe that was what Hudson needed too, a steady heart, someone to believe that kindness could still rebuild broken things. Amy walked to the fence, her thoughts drifting to the faces of people in town. Mrs. Cooper, who ran the shelter, now trying to rehome dozens of animals before the doors closed. Kids who came there after school, who found comfort in the small acts of care. Amy could almost hear Ty's voice, calm and sure as ever. "Do good where you stand, Ames. The rest will follow." The words weren't just a memory anymore, they were a direction. As the morning sun climbed higher, Amy realized something. Maybe this donation wasn't meant to stay in one place. Maybe it was meant to move, like the way Ty's kindness had always moved through others, quietly but powerfully. The ranch would survive, but the shelter, without help, it would disappear. Amy took a deep breath, the wind brushing her hair back. For the first time that morning, her heart didn't feel heavy. It felt certain. She didn't know how the others would react, Lou, Jack, or even Lisa, but she knew what Ty would have said if he were standing there beside her. He would have smiled, that quiet, knowing smile, and said, "You already know the answer, Ames." And she did. The decision hadn't been made with her head, but with her heart, the same heart that Ty had once trusted to keep his dream alive. The evening sky over Heartland turned a soft orange, the kind of color that reminded Amy of calm endings, but this time, the peace felt uneasy. The letter was now lying open on the kitchen table. The corners curled slightly from her fingers, tracing it over and over again. Lou sat across from her, brows furrowed, arms crossed. The air between them felt tight, like it was carrying more than words could hold. "So let me get this straight," Lou said, her voice steady but sharp. "You're planning to give away half the donation." "Half of it, Amy. When Heartland needs a new therapy barn and more horses." Amy's eyes didn't rise at first. She stared at the wood grain of the table, following the lines like paths that all seemed to lead nowhere. "Not give away," she said softly. "Redistribute. Share it. The shelter in Hudson is shutting down, Lou. Ty used to help there. They're out of options." Lou leaned back, sighing heavily. "Amy, I understand what that place meant to him. I do. But we can't keep saving everyone. Heartland has to grow too. We've been stretching thin as it is." Amy looked up then, her gaze steady but filled with something deeper, the kind of quiet that comes from conviction, not stubbornness. You think I don't know that? But maybe growing isn't always about getting bigger. Maybe it's about doing right, even when it costs something. For a moment, silence sat heavy in the room. Only the ticking of the old wall clock filled the space. Jack stood by the doorway, listening but not speaking yet. He'd seen enough arguments in this house to know when to let the words breathe. Finally, he said, Ty would have been proud of that thought. Lou turned to him, frustration flashing in her eyes. Jack, please. You know we can't just hand over that kind of money. We've got staff, feed bills, maintenance, and we'll manage. Jack interrupted gently. We always do. Amy met Jack's eyes, grateful for the quiet support there. He didn't need to say more. He understood her heart before she ever spoke it. As Lou got up, gathering her planner and phone, she shook her head slightly. Just promise me you'll think it through before you make a final move. Emotion doesn't always build barns. Amy, the door clicked behind her as she left, and the house grew still again. Amy leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes. The quiet pressed in around her. The kind of quiet that wasn't peaceful but heavy with decision. She thought back to the nights Ty used to stay up late in the barn, his hands smelling of antiseptic and hay, eyes tired but kind. He used to say that real healing took time, that it wasn't just about the medicine, but the care behind it. Amy remembered how he once gave up a clinic bonus to pay for a stray dog's surgery. He never told anyone but her. The echo of his words filled her again. Do good where you stand. It wasn't just something Ty had said, it was who he was. And Amy knew that part of him still lived through her choices. The next morning, she rose before dawn. The ranch was quiet, mist rolling low across the fields. She saddled Spartan and rode toward town, her breath visible in the cold air. Hudson was waking slowly, lights flickering on in shop windows, smoke rising from chimneys. She stopped near the animal shelter and dismounted. The building looked worse up close, peeling paint. Cracked steps, a faded sign that read Hudson Animal Rescue. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the smell of straw and old wood filled the air. A woman in her late 50s looked up from a kennel, surprise flashing across her face. Amy Fleming, the woman asked. I didn't expect to see you here so early. Amy smiled faintly. Hi, Mrs. Cooper. I heard what's happening. I just wanted to see for myself. Mrs. Cooper wiped her hands on her apron, shaking her head. It's breaking my heart, Amy. We've been trying to keep it afloat, but without help, we'll have to close in a week. I've been finding homes for the animals as fast as I can, but her voice trailed off, cracking slightly. Amy crouched beside one of the kennels. A small brown dog pressed its nose against the bars, tail wagging weakly. Ty used to bring Lindy here, she said quietly. He loved this place. He said it reminded him that every creature deserves a chance. Mrs. Cooper smiled sadly. He had a good soul, that man. Amy stood, looking around the old posters, the worn feeding bowls, the faint sound of cats meowing from the back. It wasn't much, but it was hope in its simplest form. She realized then that this shelter wasn't just a building. It was a piece of Hudson's heart as she stepped back outside. The morning sun broke through the clouds, casting a soft glow across the roof. Amy took out her phone and looked at the donation letter once more. Then, with a steady breath, she made a call. Lou, she said when her sister answered. I've thought it through. I'm not just helping the shelter. I'm helping Hudson. And I think that's exactly what Ty would have wanted. On the other end, Lou didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, All right, Amy. Just make sure you do it the right way. Amy smiled faintly. I will. She ended the call and looked toward the hills beyond town. The decision felt final now, not out of guilt, but out of love. Heartland wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a promise, one she was ready to keep. And as Spartan neighed softly behind her, the wind seemed to carry Ty's voice once more, gentle, proud, and full of the same warmth that had once changed her life. You did good, Ames. The sky above Hudson was pale and silver, the kind of morning that carried both chill and promise. Amy parked her truck outside the town hall, the letter folded neatly in her hand, and a quiet courage in her chest. The weight of the past few days still sat heavy on her shoulders, but for the first time, it felt like the kind of weight she could carry, not as a burden, but as purpose. Inside, the hall buzzed softly with small-town life, the shuffle of papers, the murmur of familiar voices. Amy had been here countless times before, usually for community meetings or fundraisers, but today felt different. Today, she wasn't just representing Heartland, she was representing Ty's spirit. And the kindness he had left behind. When the clerk recognized her, she smiled warmly. Amy Fleming. Haven't seen you in a while. How's the ranch? Amy returned the smile, though her eyes carried thought. Still standing, still healing. I'm here to talk about Hudson Animal Rescue. The clerk's expression softened. Ah, yes. Shame, what's happening there? We just couldn't find the funding this year. The town's budget's stretched thin. Amy nodded, then laid the folded letter on the counter. Maybe I can help with that. The woman read it, her eyes widening as she looked back up. Amy, this is a lot of money. Amy smiled faintly. It's not mine. It's for Hudson and for Ty. By midday, word had spread. The people of Hudson were talking again. Not about closures or bad news, but about hope. Amy stood beside Mrs. Cooper in the dusty courtyard of the shelter, where volunteers had already begun sweeping the floors and replacing old boards. The sound of laughter and barking filled the air, sounds that had been missing for too long. Lou arrived a few hours later, her expression cautious but curious. She stepped out of her car and walked toward Amy, watching the small group of townsfolk painting the front fence a new shade of white. I'll admit, Lou said with a small smile, you've got everyone talking. Amy grinned, brushing a streak of paint off her hand. Good kind of talking, I hope. Lou nodded slowly. The best kind. She paused, then looked around. I think I see what you meant now. It's not about losing money. It's about spreading what matters. Amy's eyes softened. Ty taught me that. You don't heal by keeping things. You heal by giving what you can. They stood together for a moment, the sunlight catching in the fresh paint, the air filled with life again. A few kids were helping carry supplies, their laughter echoing down the street. Mrs. Cooper approached them, wiping her hands on her apron, her eyes misty with gratitude. Amy, you've done more than save a shelter. You've reminded people that we can still count on each other. Amy shook her head gently. It wasn't me. It was Hudson. It was Ty. That evening, Amy returned to Heartland. The sky was painted in pinks and golds, the last rays of sunlight resting gently on the paddocks. Jack was waiting by the barn, leaning against a post with his usual calm presence. Looks like you had a busy day, he said as Amy walked up. Amy smiled softly. The shelter's safe now. People showed up. They all pitched in, Lou, the kids, even some of the ranch hands from town. It feels right. Jack nodded. That's what happens when you lead with your heart. It catches on. Amy gazed out across the field, where Spartan grazed quietly. I just kept thinking about Ty. How he'd never walk past someone in need. He never thought small. He always believed that kindness could stretch farther than we think. Jack's eyes warmed with pride. He'd be proud of you. Amy, you didn't just keep his dream alive, you grew it. The barn light flickered on, casting a soft glow over the yard. Amy stepped closer to Spartan, running her hand down his neck. It's funny, she said softly. When I lost Ty, I thought everything stopped. But now I see. He never really left. He's still here in every good thing that happens because of what he believed. Jack rested a hand on her shoulder. Love like that doesn't end, Amy. It just finds new ways to keep going. Later that night, Amy sat on the porch alone, the cool air brushing against her skin. The stars were beginning to appear quiet, steady lights against the dark. Lindy had gone to bed after asking the same question she always did. Mom, do you think Daddy sees us? Amy had smiled and said, yes, sweetheart. He sees every good thing we do. Now, as she sat beneath the wide Alberta sky, Amy whispered the same words again, this time to the night itself. I hope you saw today, Ty. I hope you saw what your love built. A gentle wind passed through the trees, stirring the chimes near the window. It was just the wind, she knew that. And yet, there was a warmth to it, a feeling like reassurance, like a hand brushing hers for just a moment. She smiled through quiet tears, her heart light for the first time in a long while. Tomorrow, she would meet with the Heartland staff to plan the new therapy expansion, smaller than she had first imagined. But now with a new mission, part of their earnings would go to community aid every season. It wasn't just about horses anymore. It was about people, animals, and hope, the full circle of care Ty had always talked about. Amy leaned back in her chair, looking out at the moonlit fields. Somewhere, a horse neighed softly, and the night seemed to hum with life. Heartland had always been a place of healing, but now, it had become something more. A promise renewed, a love continued, and as the wind carried through the valley, Amy could almost hear it, Ty's voice, soft and steady, the same as ever. Proud of you, Ames. You did what matters most. Hudson woke gentle and bright, as if the town itself had taken a deep breath and finally exhaled. Fresh paint on storefronts caught the light, New planters lined the sidewalks. The chatter of neighbors drifted from the cafe, not about problems or rumors, but about what was next, who needed help, and what time everyone would meet at the shelter. Hope didn't arrive like a parade. It arrived like morning quiet, certain, everywhere at once. Amy felt it as soon as she parked by the curb and stepped onto the street. She carried no speech, no grand plan in her hands, just a calm certainty in her chest that this was the right ending for a hard chapter, and the right beginning for a tender one. By the time she reached Hudson Animal Rescue, a small crowd had already gathered. Kids stood with homemade signs that said "Welcome Home" and "Second Chances." A few seniors from the community center set out cookies on a folding table, arguing kindly about whether the chocolate chip batch needed more time in the oven. Volunteers moved with simple purpose, setting up water bowls, checking clipboards, laughing in the way people do when the heaviness has finally lifted. Amy watched a young boy kneel down to greet a shy gray cat, his whisper steady and kind. She could tell he had practiced that gentleness. It reminded her of Ty. Lou slipped beside her, bumping shoulders in the easy way sisters do when words feel too big. She didn't make a speech either. She just looked around and gave a tiny nod, the kind that says, "You did good, and I see it." Jack followed a step behind, tipping his hat to everyone as if he were blessing the ground. He didn't need to say much. His eyes carried that old ranch wisdom: when a fence is mended right, it doesn't creak when the wind pushes it. Someone had made a new sign for the entrance. Hudson Animal Rescue, a community of care. Under it, on a small wooden plaque, there were 10 hand-carved letters for Ty. No dates, no long lines, just his name, clean and warm, like a word you say when you want the room to feel safe. Amy traced the letters with her eyes and felt a softness flood her chest, not sharp like grief, but deep like peace. To love someone is to build something they would have loved. Now the proof of that love lived in wood and paint and wagging tails. Animals began arriving for adoption day. Not every animal was ready, and not every family would be a fit, but the rhythm was right. A teacher adopted a patient old dog for her classroom, saying he would help nervous students settle. A mechanic took home a strong young shepherd, who seemed to understand engines better than people. A baker picked a one-eyed cat and joked that every kitchen needed a supervisor. Each match looked ordinary from afar, but up close, you could see the small miracle two stories choosing to walk forward together. Amy did not stand on a stage. She moved quietly, helping, hugging, answering questions, and listening. When a reporter asked for a quote, she smiled and kept it simple. The town showed up. The money followed purpose, and kindness did the heavy lifting. That was the whole story, and the best one. She mentioned Heartland's new plan, too. Each season, a part of their earnings would go back to the town food drives, vet vouchers, youth riding bursaries, whatever was needed most. Growing, she said, means we grow together. The reporter stopped writing and just looked at her, like he had heard something he wanted to remember. Later, back at the ranch, the evening opened wide and soft. The horses grazed in a hush that always felt like prayer. Amy stood by the fence with Lindy, counting the stars as they popped into place. Lindy asked if the animals would be happy in their new homes. Amy said yes, because home is a promise someone shows up, someone listens, someone keeps the light on. Then Lindy asked the second question, the one that always landed like a feather and a stone at the same time. Does Daddy see us when we help? Amy took a breath and told the truth she believed with her whole heart. Love doesn't disappear, it changes shape so it can be everywhere.